Welcome back into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and Swig has something that he wants to get off his chest right away about our hockey teams. What is that?
Well, I'm just a little bit frustrated about the Rangers. We're not doing a hockey episode tonight, so I just wanted to do a quick as we start here. They continue the frustrating trend of pissing away winnable hockey games. So they're playing the Devils tomorrow night at the time of recording, a team that's playing their first game in 2 weeks off of a COVID pause. Also, happy that everyone on the Devils is okay. But if the Rangers continue to lose games in these incredibly frustrating ways, I'm heading to the Brooklyn Bridge with a rope and some cinder blocks. If anyone needs a ride, please let me know. Continue.
Wow. Very harsh words there from Swig about his hockey team not doing well. On my side, the Chicago Blackhawks, they are doing well. They get to overtime every single night, so at least they're getting a point, and somehow they find a way to win the majority of the time. So the Blackhawks,
so they're getting 2 points.
Yeah, sometimes they get two. Regardless, they get one. I mean, heck, they got 4 overtime losses on the season. I mean, that's still a bright spot. But hey, I mean, it's looking peachy on my side.
Well, at least the Rangers aren't the Leafs, who blew a 4-goal lead to Ottawa tonight and lost in overtime Monday night at the time of the recording. And I do want to give a quick mention here to the Islanders, who have gotten a point in 7 straight games now. They beat the Sabres 3-1 tonight, and their defense, which we all know they're renowned for, they held the Buffalo Sabres to 0 shots on goal in the third period tonight. I couldn't tell you the last time I've seen that in a close game where they're protecting a lead and the Sabres couldn't even get a shot on goal. That's pretty damn impressive.
It is impressive. And Sam Reinhart had a couple goal and an assist, I believe, in that one, or at least a goal. He had a nice tally there. So he still put up points. He didn't even shoot the puck in the third period. Neither did any of the Buffalo Sabres. So
well,
kudos to their
promise
defense.
You he only had 1 point because the Sabres only had 1 goal.
That's true. That's right. They had 1 goal. Do that, Matt Dillon. Okay, anyway, let's get into the Cubs talk real quick. Jake Arrieta is back. The Snake, the NL Cy Young winner in 2015, the World Series champion, and all of that good stuff. Jake Arrieta is back, heading to Chicago. I'm gonna be honest here. A lot of Cubs fans are like, "Oh, this is a nostalgic move. I don't think the Cubs should have done this. Well, stop living in the past." You know what? I don't care. If Jake's taking the ball, I'm going to root my tail off because he is someone that I love, and he is my all-time favorite pitcher in my lifetime that I've seen pitch. Jake Arrieta, welcome back to Chicago. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I didn't hear any bias or personal emotion in that conversation at all. Second of all, I don't mind it. It's a 1-year contract. He provides the Cubs rotation with a little bit of depth. Don't forget they did lose Yu Darvish and John Lester over the offseason. So the rest of the rotation's a little bit unproven. He is a veteran guy who has pitched, let's say, average baseball for the Phillies the last couple of seasons, hasn't rediscovered his glory days from those 2 years with the Cubs yet. But he is also, amazingly, the last Cubs pitcher to win a playoff game.
Yeah, it's been a while since they've had their chances. I mean, 2018, they had their wild card appearance. That didn't go their way. 2019, they missed the playoffs. 2020, no, don't get me started about the Marlins. But anyway, let's talk more about Jake here. And the Cubs as a whole. You look at their pitching rotation now. They have Kyle Hendricks, Zach Davies is the number 2. Trevor Williams is in the mix, maybe at the 3, 4, or 5, depending on where you want to put him there. Jake Arrieta has a spot in the rotation, along with Alec Mills, who threw a no-hitter. Now, if you look at this from the Cubs side, they have a kid named Adbert Alzolay. A lot of Cubs fans have seen him. Super young, has great stuff, strikeout stuff, and can actually win you ball games. I think this shows the direction that the Cubs are going in, where you have a lot of people competing, which is a good thing. But I think Adbert needs that rotation spot, needs a spot in the rotation to where he can prove that he can pitch in this big league level. And I think this is something that they need to do. I love the competitiveness because there's going to be a lot of pitchers battling for that 5 spot, whether it's Williams, Arrieta, Alzolay. They also have Shelby Miller competing there. What do you think about Alzolay potentially getting subbed out of the rotation?
It's a really tough spot for the Cubs because they are clearly under that ownership mandate to cut costs, cut payroll, which they have done successfully this offseason. But they're also in a division that outside of the Cardinals getting gifted Nolan Arenado on a silver platter has been very passive this offseason, I'd say. Milwaukee brought in Colton Wong, but it's been a relatively quiet offseason for the rest of the division, including the Cubs. And despite all of their flaws, they're still going to be a team that should remain remain competitive. They still have some talent both in the lineup and on their pitching staff. Alzolay is a guy who's young and has electric stuff, but is unproven. So my thought originally was that at least at first, while they try to get some reliable innings eaters like Trevor Williams to start the season, you could make the argument for Arrieta as well. I think neither of them are likely to give you more than 5 or 6 innings most nights at this point in their career, is that they want to use Alzolay as a guy who can be versatile enough to move back and forth between the rotation and the bullpen if necessary. And considering they have the depth to do that, and that might ease him in a little bit, kind of like what the Mets are doing with Seth Lugo. Do you think that would be a wise move?
I don't know. I think I'm going to be honest here. That a lot of people fall in love with Alec Mills because he threw the no-hitter. He's not that good of a pitcher. Look at the stats. Look at everything that he does. 4.95 ERA, I believe it was last season. He's not what everyone thinks he is. Yes, I love that he threw a no-hitter. I love that he occasionally has a few good starts. But I think his role, they wanted him to be the swing man out of the bullpen. And I think potentially if he has a bad spring where his ERA is north of 8 and he gets rocked around, I think he could be the one with the short end of the stick going to the bullpen. And maybe it's sort of that Chris Heston role that the San Francisco Giants had, where he was in the rotation, had the no-hitter, but he just couldn't keep up a role in their rotation. So I think Alec Mills is the Chris Heston of this rotation for all you baseball fans out there that remember him.
It's an interesting comp. And Petit, who used to be on San Francisco, I think he pitched a one-hitter in a similar back and forth role. So I don't know what it is with the Giants there, but I could see Alzolay, that could be hurtful for his development. You could make several comparisons that aren't quite linear, of course, to pitchers across baseball on different teams. The Yankees, you could still argue Jabba Chamberlain, for example. He ended up being disappointing despite his highly touted nature. The Yankees tried to make him into a starter. It worked at first, then it didn't work. Then there was the infamous game with the Bugs in the playoffs. And we all know that that's going to happen to Alzolay exactly like that. Everything's exactly comparable, right? Or maybe Steve Bartman will show back up and ruin a perfect game for him. Yeah, that's right. And he gave me the Yankees joke last week. Yeah. But the question mark to me is actually going to be if Shelby Miller is going to have any sort of role in that rotation, because when he came up with St. Louis to start his career, he was a really good looking pitcher. And then the Diamondbacks, who had Tony La Russa in the front office, made that a huge trade where they gave up Dansby Swanson, who was first overall pick, and they gave up Ender Inciarte, and he ends up going to Atlanta after that. He is just fizzled out, basically. He hasn't been a consistent starter in the league for several years. I have a lot of doubts that he's going to come anywhere close to reaching what he once was. And to me, he should be a last-ditch kind of option unless something really bad happens to the rest of the Cubs rotation.
I think it's good that we're having this talk because it shows that the Cubs have depth in the pitching rotation, which is something they haven't had in a while. I mean, you could argue Mike Montgomery as a 6 swing man that he had, so he was something there. But I think now you look at it top to bottom, the names aren't sexy. Let's be honest. Trevor Williams isn't making you want to go buy a ticket and watch him pitch in the ballpark. But hey, he's someone that has innings under his belt at the big league level. And I think what the Cubs can do here is that they have a lot of depth. So if there are any injuries, if Arrieta's elbow shures up or anything goes on, potentially you could see Zach Davies get moved at the deadline, which frees up another rotation. Maybe that's where Alzolay slides in. So there's a lot of moving pieces here. I think everyone gets their ball and gets a chance to start at some point in the season. I would not be opposed to see them potentially trying Adbert Alzolay in a closer role if Kimbrel's traded either. He's got a nasty wipeout slider. He has his command issues, but he also pitching in the minors with Iowa. He had some shoulder issues a few years ago throughout his career. And it's like, man, does he have the stamina to keep it up? I think he does. I want him to get that shot, but I would not be opposed to see him in the bullpen as a closer either.
Well, you're talking about Alzolay with electric stuff and control issues. You're going to give Cubs fans PTSD if you put another closer like that in the role after Marmol, right? It's just at least on first glance or first hearing it from you, whatever phrase you want to use. That is kind of what it sounds like, at least at first. And throwing a guy who is inexperienced and unproven directly into the closer role is going to go one of two ways. That's either going to be great or it's going to suck big time. There's not going to be an in-between there. Now, it might help take some of the pressure off of him that there's unlikely to be many fans in the stands to start the season, so he can hopefully calm down. But I don't think it would be the best move to immediately thrust him in. If they want to use him in the bullpen, and it doesn't sound to me like the Cubs are even sure how they want to use him yet, then they're going to experiment with him in lower leverage situations first, and then eventually possibly try a seventh, eighth, ninth inning role. And I don't think it has to even be traditional closer, because that's becoming more and more outdated the further we go here. Sometimes the most important outs are in the eighth inning, for example. He could be a guy that gets those outs, but I don't think they're going to thrust him into that role right away.
That's true. You bring up a good point there. I mean, it doesn't really work out. I mean, you think maybe Roberto Ozuna is maybe one that has, but there are a lot of misses on that spot as well. But we'll dive in a little bit more later on, few weeks down the line before we get into a baseball preview. But there's a lot of depth on this team. You look at the outfield. There's about, I think, 5 or 6 guys battling for the fifth outfielder role. You assume Peterson, Happ, Hayward, Jake Marisnick would be the 4. The 5th spot, Phillip Ervin against the lefty. You also have Michael Hermosillo, Rafael Ortega. There's a lot of depth there. On the infield, maybe the second base spot, you have Ildemaro Vargas, Matt Duffy, David Bodie. There's a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot of depth. So I think this could be good for this team, because going in, it seems like these last few years, you have a handful of players that you know are on the roster, and then there's 2 scraps that might make it if something drastic happens. Now you have the ability to have that depth.
I'm really curious to see what's going to happen, both with the quote unquote taxi squads that the Cubs and every other team are going to have. We're seeing that impact in hockey specifically right now, but it was a big thing in Major League Baseball. You can have the 26-man rosters now. I believe they are going to allow 28 in September now instead of 40. And then you have X amount of guys who can be shuttled back and forth essentially at the alternate site, I think is the term they used. But this year, there's going to be some sort of minor league baseball season. So these guys hopefully are going to be getting at bats or live pitching appearances that they weren't getting last season. Hopefully that keeps Cubs alternative options and every other team's alternative options a little bit more game ready, because that could not possibly be an easy situation for a guy at the alternate site playing simulated games against your own pitchers.
Yeah, it could be rough. I mean, you get Chippy that down there plus facing the same pitchers every single time. There's going to be arguments. I mean, it's not the best for chemistry, but I mean, what are you going to do about it? You're there hoping to get your call, and when you do, you might see the pitcher that you faced a lot. So maybe he gets moved or something to where you have to see him again, or so those rivalries could really develop. But I mean, it's not the best formula, but hey, as long as they have depth that could help out the ball club, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I think the bigger questions to me is just how these guys are going to be used, and then how the Cubs are going to piece their bullpen together. They brought in Jonathan Holder, but I don't see a lot of high upside type of pitchers in that bullpen right now. I think there's a limited amount of guys who can come in and get the high leverage outs when they're trying to close out a close game. And considering the Cubs offense is pretty inconsistent, and they're going to have games where they only score a couple of runs, they're going to need these guys with very little margin for error. So that could definitely pose a threat throughout the season. They're not going to be able to string too many wins together if that's the case. Now, the good news, that starting rotation, Kyle Hendricks is a top of the rotation guy. He's proven that over the last couple of years. I think Zach Davies has the upside where he can be a number 2, at the very least a number 3 pitcher, which is good. But the end of the rotation is definitely going to be the question. We've seen Trevor Williams have some decent moments in Pittsburgh before. I don't think it's out of the question, but I understand where you're coming from, saying I'd rather see Alzolay, who has a much higher ceiling at this point in his career, get those opportunities. And then if it doesn't work after a few starts, or maybe give him a couple months even, then transition him into a bullpen role instead of that in-betweener thing right away, because that's just going to piss him off.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. Let's head over to the Chicago Bulls. We got some basketball to talk today. That's going to be it for today. We're going to go basketball with the Bulls. We're going to talk Knicks, and then we'll go from there. So, Bulls, you look at this team right now. They get Wendell Carter back. That's always a positive when he's on the floor. Usually that's not the case, but here he is back. You look at this roster, and not necessarily the roster, but you look at their last few games. They win one, they lose one. They win one, they lose one. They win one, and now you don't know what's going to happen. So it's like a win-loss, teeter-totter going on there. So they can't seem to find any consistency in the win column. What if you're the head coach right now, what are you telling your team, and how do you get them to try to play and string a few wins together?
if you're Billy Donovan, you're telling your team to keep moving the ball on offense, which they're doing well, and to play some much better on defense, which has been a big problem all season long. Now, in fairness, the injuries have not helped the Bulls situation, despite the fact I know you hate Lauri Markkanen, but he has his moments where he's not shitty. He scored 30 points against the Knicks a couple weeks ago. We know what he's capable of, all right? But defensively, he has struggled for most of his career. And Lauri Markkanen is injured right now, out 2 to 4 weeks with the sprained shoulder. Wendell Carter came back for tonight's game at the time of recording, an overtime win over the Pacers after missing about a month. I don't think he'd played since mid-January. Otto Porter is out with a back injury again, which is a big blow to the Bulls bench. It's definitely something that is difficult enough for a good team to withstand. And the Bulls are still a young, developing team who is pushing for a playoff spot, possibly in the weaker Eastern Conference, but is not what I would say a contending team yet. Would you say that's fair?
I think it's completely fair because this is the same exact team that we've seen these last few years. It's just Jim Boylan's out of town. Billy Donovan, he's going to win you some games on his own for being a good coach. And you have a team around you that, once again, Porter's banged up, Wendell's banged up, Lauri's banged up. It's the same narrative. I mean, you have the same players on your roster that have had this track record. What do you expect? I mean, it's the same narrative year after year, but now they have a head coach that can steal you a few wins. So I think that's good for them. Porter, this injury, it's got to be worse than the Markkanen and Carter injuries, in my opinion. Porter gives them scoring off the bench in the six-man role. He's helped the development of Patrick Williams, who's shown some growing pains for sure during his early tenure with the Bulls. But I like what I've seen. It's still young. He's super young. He's like 19 years old, 18, whatever it is. He's super young. So it's going to take him a little while to develop. But I think Billy Donovan on his own is helping this Bulls team a lot. If Boylan's there, I think we're seeing the same exact thing we've seen the last 3 years.
It's definitely stylistically different, though, in my opinion. At least right now, the Bulls' offense is legitimately solid. They're moving the ball well. And that's especially true when Kobe White is not tasked to be the designated playmaker. That is still something, it's not the strength of his game. I don't think the Bulls are going to give up on that project yet, but the Bulls ran wild the other night when they beat the Pelicans a couple days back because White was mostly playing off the ball. They were having Levine distribute a lot, and that led to White getting a bunch of open shots, which he hit up a lot of. I think he ended up with 30 points in that game, and it simplifies the game and plays to his strengths. If Billy Donovan and the Bulls do that more often, they're going to score plenty of points and win more games. Now, their defense is still going to be a work in progress, even if everybody's healthy. But I do want to give a quick shout out to two guys on the bench who I don't think we've talked about enough on this show yet. And that's true whether Porter's playing or not. The first is Thaddeus Young, who is also a veteran presence. I know he doesn't play the same position, obviously, but he can be a guy who can hopefully teach guys like Markkanen and Wendell Carter, when they're healthy, better defensive rebounding positioning, for example. I think Young has the experience to do that. He's put some solid minutes offensively as well. And then the other one is a guy who stepped up a little bit with the injuries, and that's Denzel Valentine, the guy who's been out of the in and out of the rotation for a couple years in Chicago, but he's a versatile combo guard who we know what he's capable of offensively. He's starting to shoot the ball more consistently, and it fits with Billy Donovan's system.
Yeah, I like what I've seen out of Valentine. And it's funny that you bring up Thaddeus Young because on ESPN 1000, the Chicago radio station, they said, is Thaddeus Young the second best player on the Bulls right now? And they both said, shot. Yeah, he is. And like, but it is sad that he is because he's this journeyman NBA player that's shined where he's been, but I mean, he's not sexy, but I mean, he helps you out a little bit. So, I mean, it's good that you're getting production out of a veteran like that. And he's definitely brought a lot to this team. And I'm glad you brought him up because he has done a fantastic job filling in for these minutes that Markkanen's been missing, and God knows who else, Porter now. I mean, he's going to get his fair share of playing time. And I think it's beneficial to this Bulls team because he's a good player.
He has been a good player. I know what you're going for with journeyman, but I don't think that's the right word because that kind of implies end of the rotation, end of the roster guy. Young has been an integral part of pretty much every team he's been on. So I think I get what you're going for, but I don't want to discredit what he's done in his career. He's been a very solid, above average player. Kind of reminds me of David West, for example, at the end of his career. Just the leadership, the intangibles, the consistency they bring to a team that doesn't necessarily have that. The rest of the Bulls can be be a little bit more volatile with their inconsistency. And I think you can definitely make the argument he's been the most consistent Bulls player, and obviously the second best behind Daniel Gafford, right?
Yeah, Gafford. Yeah, man. I'm gonna be honest though, Daniel Gafford. I like what I saw out of him. I harp big time. I said, you look at this roster. This was preseason. I said, you look at this roster. Gafford bad, Cornette bad, Felicio bad. You need to sign a backup center. Go back to those tapes where I said the Bulls need to get a backup center. I was preaching for Nerlens Noel. We'll get into him with the Knicks talk, but look. I underestimated what Daniel Gafford could bring to this Bulls team because with the injury to Wendell, I mean, now Wendell's back, but Gafford stepped up and he looked pretty darn good.
He provides a lot of energy. It's just kind of reining him in a little bit, making sure he stays out of foul trouble. The efficiency is still leaving a little to be desired, but you can see a lot of upside with him. It kind of translates from what we saw from him back when he was at Arkansas. He is a very interesting fit. And I do want to also give Garrett Temple some props. I know we haven't hit on him yet. I think he's been a really solid, consistent player. And if you have him and Thaddeus Young and Otto Porter when he's healthy, all coming off the bench, those are three veteran guys who are consistent and can bring a little bit of stability to a talented but inconsistent Bulls team.
Yeah, I like what I've seen out of him too. I mean, that's a good addition. I mean, the Bulls didn't do too much in free agency. We harped on that a little bit where, all right, did they do enough? But they did. I think what you've seen out of Garrett Temple is pretty solid. He brings that dimension to you. He was a former Brooklyn Net, and they cut ties with him. I think they replaced him with who's that shooting guard we were talking about that's buried on their depth chart but sometimes plays?
Oh, the Nets, man. They brought in a few guys. They have Shamet. They have
Shamet was the replacement to Garrett Temple on their roster. And I think Temple's done a good job there. That's the thing about this Bulls team. There is some hidden gems in their depth. I mean, they're not gems, but they provide meaningful minutes when God knows when their players go down. So I think it's good that you have that. And I wanted to bring up a name. Once again, I'm going to quote ESPN 1000 Chicago. You look at the Miami Heat. They have a player. I think his name is Tice. Was it? Wait, hold on. Let me find it. They brought up Max Strus on ESPN 1000 Chicago, and he was someone that went to DePaul, was in the Bulls system, and he's a lot of Chicago there. He tore his ACL anyway. He slipped through the cracks and got away, and he's putting up numbers for the Miami Heat right now. He's only played in 15 games, averaging 7.5 points per game. And he's someone that's always been able to score the ball. And he's someone that just slipped through the cracks. I'm not going to harp too much on it, but if he was still around, I think that it might have been a little bit different on this minutes rotation and what he could have brought to the team.
The Bulls point guard situation is been the biggest debate, the biggest question mark throughout the season, right? And we talked about that in terms of Kobe White's not a true point guard. I think that reigns true, going back to what I was saying earlier, him playing off the ball, simplifying the game for him so he can shoot. That is where he's going to be at his most efficient, right? The Bulls brought in Devon Dotson as a undrafted free agent. I'm curious to see if he gets more run here at the end of the season. But outside of that, there have been some rumors that might finally move Kobe White off ball more permanently. And that would be if they acquire Lonzo Ball from the New Orleans Pelicans. We all know he is a true point guard who would distribute, facilitate more than he would look to score, could set up Zach LaVine, could set up Kobe White. If Markkanen stays on the court, set some guys up for some open threes, open looks. Do you think that would be a good addition? If so, what do you think it would take to acquire him?
This is tough. I think it's big if they do. You got to look at your team as a whole. If you're AK, if you're Mark Eversley, even Billy Donovan, because he has some sort of role. We talked about that before, how they all combine their thoughts together before they make any of these moves. That's one of the reasons why Billy Donovan was attracted to the Bulls job, not because of their roster. You look at this team, and you have to take a deep dive. Okay, are we going to be buyers or are we going to be sellers? You look at your team right now. If you're selling, Thaddeus Young better be on a bus that gets out of town right now, because I think you can get a lot for him. He's playing well. He's doing what you need, and I think you could get a solid return for him. If you're serious about building, do that. If you're serious about getting these young players playoff experience and getting a winning culture there that could attract some of these big free agents in 2021, 22, that's where you make this move for Lonzo Ball. That's where you bring in someone who can facilitate. You move Kobe White to the shooting guard. You move Zach LaVine to the 3. You have everyone moving around a little bit to where Markkanen doesn't even have to see the floor. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, he still will play, but I mean, if he's healthy. So you look at this team. I think you look at Lonzo Ball. You bring him in. He's gonna help you win right now. So it comes down to AK and Mark Eversley saying, are we gonna buy or are we gonna sell? If we buy, you might have a shot at making the playoffs. I think they will. If they sell, Thaddeus Young better be getting out of town. Those are the two comps.
Well, it would definitely be a move that would signal the direction of the team, one way or the other, right? It would provide a little bit of clarity. It's a bit of an interesting argument because the Eastern Conference is so mediocre, basically, from top to bottom. At the time of recording, there's the three teams at the top of the East in Philadelphia, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee. And then there's the two at the bottom with Detroit and the Wizards. The other 10 teams in the conference are all within about 3 or 4 games of each other. So it's highly conceivable that a couple of them are going to slip into the playoffs. And another thing to remember is that the 7 through 10 seeds are playing in a play-in tournament to be the true 7 and 8 seeds this year. So you really have to be in the top 10 seeds in the conference to at least have a taste of that playoff basketball. I don't think it's unreasonable that the Bulls could reach that spot, especially with their offense being a legitimately top tier offense in the league, or at least a top 10 to 15 offense. They might be a little inconsistent, but it's the clear strength of the team. They might be able to keep Thaddeus Young's contract and throw it in the package for Lonzo Ball, because you're going to have to match salaries there. And if I'm not mistaken, Lonzo Ball is a restricted free agent after the season. So if the Bulls get him, they're going to have to pay a decent amount of money to keep him around. We all know not a perfect player, obviously, but a strong defender who seems to be improving his shot making ability. And that could just bring another dimension to the offense. So it's just, do the Bulls think he can be the legitimate point guard of the future? If so, I don't think it would be super expensive to acquire, but they would have to be careful in terms of, you don't want to gut the whole bench, and you also don't want to sacrifice too much of the future for limited immediate success. If he was a guy who would guarantee you a playoff spot, then I could at least understand it, although I still think it's short-sighted. I don't think Lonzo Ball is that guy who can immediately say, hey, this will solve the Bulls' biggest problem and make them a playoff team. I don't think he's quite good enough for that.
He does bring that facilitating factor to the team, and that's something they haven't had in a very long time. I think that would help them a lot. He does bring defensive versatility too, and I'm going to bring up a point. We'll go back and forth on this one. Why'd you let Chris Dunn go if you needed defensive help at the point guard spot, if you needed defensive help on your roster? Why'd you let him walk out of the building? Now you want to acquire someone that has more facilitating ability, but you let the defense go out the building, and now you want to bring it back in? Why wouldn't you just re-sign Chris Dunn, or basically get, what was a qualifying offer, whatever that is, where you offer them to bring him back, and they let him walk. They declined his option to let him go. Why would you make this move for Lonzo Ball when you had the defensive versatility right there?
Well, I think it's because Chris Dunn wasn't a great fit for what Billy Donovan and Arturas Karnisovas want to do, or the style of basketball they want to play. I understand Chris Dunn is an outstanding defender who can guard multiple positions, and the Bulls are looking for that defensive versatility. However, they're also looking for guys who can push the pace offensively and space the floor with their shooting ability. Chris Dunn cannot do that. He's proven that so far in his career. I wouldn't call Lonzo a great shooter or a floor spacer at this point in his career either, but he is significantly better in transition and pushing the ball up the court. That, to me, is a better stylistic fit from what Billy Donovan and Karnisovas said up front that they want to bring to their team, or the type of guy they want to have on their team. Lonzo Ball, defensively, we know how good he is on that side of the ball. He also has the ability to guard multiple positions and do everything that Chris Dunn can do, but might be a better fit for them offensively. And he's also bigger than Chris Dunn, and that wingspan could come in handy on both ends of the court.
That's true. I think you won the argument with that segment real quick. I mean, I don't have a counter. That was fair point. So kudos, 1 point to Swig on that one. He wins the battle of the Chris Dunn talk. But we will talk about the Chicago Bulls in the poll question of the week real quick. Should the Bulls be buyers or sellers at the deadline? I gave you the points on the Thaddeus Young moving and potentially Lonzo Ball coming in. What's your thought process as a Bulls fan? Head over to the Big City Sports PD on Twitter and vote. If you liked what I said, if you think it gives more clarity for future success to sell, go for it. If you think that it's good for them to buy and maybe get that playoff experience and click buy. But other than that, we're going to dive into the Knicks. The Knicks, the New York Knickerbockers. That's what they are called. We're going to head into them real quick. Mitchell Robinson's battling an injury. He's the center, of course, a great young, talented center. And interesting here because, I mean, he's really good. He's going to miss time. Julius Randle's looked really good. That's the main talking point here. Julius Randle's been on fire these last few games. With Robinson out, do you think that has definitely ignited the fire under Julius Randle to continue what he's doing?
He's been doing it all season, man. I mean, first of all, I mean, great introduction of what they're called. I mean, thanks for that. But yeah, getting stroked off at the end of the Bulls segment, right? Yeah, of course I won the debate. I win every debate, right? Yeah, sound off in the comments about that. But I also think it's time to stroke off Julius Randle a little bit more than we have. I wasn't a huge fan of what he did his first season in New York, but he has been exceptional, a legitimate all-star for the Knicks this year. Not to overreact or anything, but I think he's been a god for the Knicks this season. Now, like I said, no overreaction whatsoever. But we were going to focus more on Mitchell Robinson, and that's still a big loss for the Knicks here. He's out 4 to 6 weeks. He broke his hand the other night. But just for a minute, the Knicks played a game earlier tonight at the time of recording. They beat the Hawks, and Julius Randle scored 44 points. He made, I think, 7 3-pointers. He was just making difficult shots. He also added some 9 rebounds and 5 assists. And he, while this is a high point for him in terms of his point total, he has been playing an efficient, well-rounded game all season. He's improved as a rebounder, especially as a passer, a 3-point shooter. He has been amazing and deserves all the praise he's been getting. I could not stress enough what a positive impact he's been, and he's been a great fit under what Tom Thibodeau wants to do and what he wants to bring to the team. And the Knicks, amazingly, are only 1 game under 500 right now.
Yeah, they could be setting themselves up for a playoff spot. You saw the trade of Derrick Rose. Poll question results said that this trade makes them playoff contenders. So I think it was 78% said yes. The remaining 22 said no. So you look at the Knicks. They're playing some good basketball right now. Obviously, the injury to Mitchell Robinson is a big concern, especially if they're looking for success down the road and trying to make the playoffs. But you also have been getting some pretty solid production out of Nerlens Noel and Taj Gibson, who have cycled around a little bit more in the rotation. And I think it's done wonders for this team because you think back, if they didn't make that Nerlens Noel signing, where are they at right now with the injury to Mitchell Robinson?
Well, I mean, I talked about it at the time. He provides a little bit of insurance for Robinson in case he got into foul trouble. And we got to talk about Mitch's impact on the team. The Knicks are a very good defensive team right now. Their offense, the Knicks and the Rangers at Madison Square Garden can't, put enough points on the board, for fuck's sake, man. But the defense for the Knicks has been great all season, and Robinson has been the anchor of that. He's a very good rebounder. He's a good shot blocker, and he has done a much better job staying out of foul trouble this year. He has yet to foul out of a game. Nerlens Noel is, to me, a very similar player in terms of strengths and weaknesses. He's usually a little bit more in control. He's better at setting screens, which is an underrated part of basketball, of course, but he is definitely somebody who I'm confident can step in and limit the decline of the defense. I think there's still going to be some, but you can't possibly expect the Knicks to replace Robinson's defensive impact with one guy. Thibodeau said the same thing. It's going to be a collective effort, and the Knicks are going to get a little bit more creative with their roster. And one thing that we saw tonight with Noel and Taj Gibson both in foul trouble in the first half is Toppin and Randle both playing on the court at the same time for really the first time this season. Randle playing some minutes at the 5. He has had some experience with that previously in his career with the Lakers and the Pelicans. How sustainable do you think that is? Do you think it's something the Knicks should experiment with more, or should they only go to it as a last resort like they did tonight with Noel and Gibson both in foul trouble?
I think it's the latter there. I think that it's something that they shouldn't resort to. It's nice to have that versatility. I'm sure Thibodeau likes that because he likes versatility and he likes defense. That's something that Randle can bring, at least on the versatility side. So you bring him there. I think you put him at the 5, at least through the Robinson injury. I think you could see him rotate a little bit there. I like Toppin being on the floor. I wanted to bring up the question real quick about Obi Toppin. He's only averaging 12.1 minutes a night. He hasn't started a game yet in his NBA career. Do you like what you've seen out of him, or do you think that he's definitely showing some cracks?
I think he's more of a project than we both expected. I thought he was kind of billed as more of the polished offensive player, but the way the Knicks are using him, he isn't getting a ton of minutes. And especially when Austin Rivers was still in the rotation, I don't think the Knicks were playing to Toppin's strengths all that much in terms of using him as a roll man on the pick and roll and taking advantage of his ridiculous athleticism, which is definitely there. I think Toppin is getting a little bit better, getting a little bit more comfortable. We have to remember he missed several weeks with a strained calf that he suffered in the season opener, and he's kind of been eased back in. And then it doesn't help that Randle, who plays the same position, has gone off. So it's going to be difficult for Toppin to get in the starting lineup immediately, and I think that's fine. I know that it's a little bit jarring to see Emmanuel quickly have such an instant impact, and Toppin has not really been that guy yet, but he has gotten a little bit better, a little bit more efficient over the last couple of weeks, and I think the Robinson injury is going to open up a little bit more playing time for him. I think it's going to take some time to realize his potential, but he's getting a little bit better each game. He's definitely still need to work on his consistency a little bit, but the talent is absolutely there.
It's nice that I don't know. I don't know if obviously you want to win, but I mean, right now you have the young talent in Toppin that's not playing as much as you'd like. As a Knicks fan right now, are you excited that they're in a playoff position because you haven't seen it in a while? Or are you like, man, I kind of wish Obi's getting a few more minutes a night, even if it means we might not win every single game?
Both. Those are both accurate statements, Ben. They're not mutually exclusive. I understand what you're saying. As recently as the beginning of this season, frankly, I didn't think the Knicks had any chance of being this competitive so far this season. We talked about the Knicks and Bulls both being at the bottom of the Eastern Conference with Cleveland and Detroit, and Cleveland's also been pretty competitive. It's been Detroit and the Wizards who have sucked up the end of the Eastern Conference, right? The Knicks, it's hard for me not to worry about how they're going to screw this up. But they have that reputation. We've seen them make these mind-numbingly stupid, shitty decisions over the years, right? I'm not opposed to them pushing for a playoff spot, but I am definitely hesitant to blowing up some of the core, some of the pieces that are vital to this core right now for somebody who might put them quote unquote over the top. I don't think it's impossible that the Knicks can make the playoffs with their current core, and they're in sixth place in the East right now. I know the East is obviously a weaker conference, but they're absolutely a team with a sustainable defense. They've proven that the defense is legit. I think that if they're able to limit or mitigate the damage of Mitchell Robinson's loss, they're still going to be able to win enough of these games to stay in the picture until he comes back. If they want to make another trade, I mean, Derrick Rose has played pretty well so far for the Knicks. He's been a good fit. He's been a better fit with Toppin than Austin Rivers was, for example. Been a great influence on Toppin and Quickly, who is also a god, by the way. No overreaction necessary. But if they want to make another trade like that, I could see it. But I think the more likely situation is they look to keep the core that's pushed them this far, some of the vital pieces intact, and trade some guys around the edges, like Austin Rivers, who's been pushed out of the rotation. They might want to include Kevin Knox, who's also out of the rotation now, in a trade for a veteran player. And if they don't give up too much, I'm open to that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Right now, I mean, they're in a position to where they are still making the playoffs. So that's huge for them, especially for their organization trying to get that sustained success, or at least some sort of success that hasn't been there in a very, 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 very long time. But here's their ability to maybe get back. And I'm with you. I wouldn't blow up anything. The team's good right now. I wouldn't change a thing. I think the Rose trade is all that you need. I mean, he puts you, I don't know if he puts you over the top, but he should be enough to get you into the playoffs as long as Randle doesn't hit a slump somewhere down the stretch, because he's looked good all year. If that play continues in the way that they're gelling right now, the defenses look good. I think this Knicks team will end up making the playoffs with what they have. But to your point, let's hope they don't mess it up by just blowing it up to where they go all in to try to bring in some superstars to New York and have it face plant.
Yeah, if they bring in a superstar, it would not be a rental type of guy. So, like, that's why I don't think it would be a Victor Oladipo type who is a free agent after the season. Maybe they go after him then in the summer. But I think if they make a trade for a guy, it would be somebody like Bradley Beal, who is under contract, who's under contract for more than the rest of this season. He would be more of a, quote unquote, long term investment. And one thing I do want to mention really quick here that I know we've kind of brushed around the edges here, but I'll just say it straightforward. We talked about how important the Bulls bench has been. The Knicks bench has been the deciding factor in so many of these games. Either Derrick Rose or Quickly or both of them have been on the court over Elfrid Payton in crunch time. Alec Burks has gotten some minutes at various points here. The bench has sparked some big runs. That was true before Derrick Rose was brought in, but they have been on fire since that trade. And that second unit were with Quickly, Rose, Toppin, Taj Gibson now instead of with Mitchell Robinson out, and Alec Burks has provided a lot of offense, a lot of floor spacing. They're pushing the pace in transition, and they are making a big difference in their minutes. And it's a really encouraging trend, and I think it's something that can continue.
Yeah, that's true. Their bench, even before the season going in, you look at this roster. I mean, they just kept adding. They kept adding these veteran players that have played in the NBA and have experience and not necessarily playoff experience, but just experience and being there in the locker room. And by the way, if you're not playing defense for Tibbs, he's going to find a way to not put you on the roster. So it makes them compete a little bit more, kind of like how the Cubs are a little bit overloaded right now. You'll find which ones want to stick around, which ones will play, which ones will get the minutes, the bench role. And to your point, they have looked phenomenal coming off the bench. It doesn't matter. Even if a bench player went down, I still feel confident in the depth that the Knicks have, because I mean, it's been spectacular so far.
Well, you have to remember a lot of the Knicks depth players have gone down at some point this season. Almost every player has missed at least a couple of games. Quickly missed some games at the beginning of the season. So did Toppin. So did Alec Burks. So did Bullock. I'm trying to remember. Nerlens Noel has missed a couple of games here and there. There have been several options, frankly. Now that the Knicks have gotten everyone back and made the trade for Derrick Rose, it's pushed Kevin Knox and Austin Rivers out of the rotation. So the Knicks don't have a lot of what I'd say premier talent, but they do have a lot of legitimate NBA talent and a decent amount of depth and versatility that you wouldn't expect for a team that's sucked for the majority of 20 years, right? They tried something like that last offseason with Randle and several other guys. Bullock and Gibson are still on the team, but then you also look at Wayne Ellington, who didn't work out, and Bobby Portis. They did turn Marcus Morris into a first-round pick that eventually became Quickly, so I'll give that one a pass. But you see the contrasting approach. And the guys that the Knicks brought in on these short-term contracts this season were much more sensible, in my opinion. For one, they didn't all play the same goddamn position, and for a second one, they're guys who have either been on playoff teams like Austin Rivers, or guys who have the knowledge and the skill set to complement the younger players. I think Nerlens Noel is the best example of that, and what he can teach Mitchell Robinson. And we've seen them have a much more positive impact. The Knicks are still a relatively limited team in terms of upside. Their offense still is not the greatest, not the most consistent. They're usually still not a great three-point shooting team, but they're getting enough out of the players they have. Julius Randle's playing like an all-star. We're seeing improvements from Quickly every game, and that defense is legitimate. They brought Derrick Rose in, kind of establishes the culture a little bit more, and it's clear to me that the Knicks, at the very least, are not trying to tank this season anymore.
Yeah, that's good that they're not trying to tank, because year after year they end up not getting lucky in the lottery. So good news for
Tell me
them.
about it.
They're finally competing. So that's good. I want to ask you guys at home, everybody out there, do you want to know who's going to be the next quarterback for the Chicago Bears? Do you want to know who's going to be the next quarterback for the New York Jets? What moves will the Giants make? You'll find out next on our free agency episode coming up next week. Make sure you check that out. It comes out to Thursday at noon Eastern time, as always. But for this episode, that's going to wrap it up. Check out the poll question mentioned as earlier. We talked about, will the Chicago Bulls be buyers or sellers at the deadline, or should they be buyers or sellers at the deadline, I should say. Other than that, we're out on all platforms. Check us out, YouTube, Spotify. Click the subscribe button. Comment below on all of those. Also, Apple Podcasts. Click the review or click the stars and leave a review. We'd love to hear that as well. But other than that, that's going to wrap it up for today. This is a Big City Sports Podcast. I'm Dylan Kearns with Swig, and we will see you next time.